refers to the analysis of the processes underlying intelligent behavior, or how we do what we do. I'm taking this approach because I think it's a valuable approach. There's a difference between being told that your child has an IQ of a 90 or 100 or 70 or 150 and being told how your child thinks, how your child processes information, how it solves problems, you see, or fails to solve problems. And one of the reasons it solves problems or fails to solve problems. When you're given the latter type of information, you're given a program, you see. You're giving a basis upon which you can operate to transform the behavior and orientation of your child. But for someone to say, well, he has an IQ of 90 or has an IQ of 70, what do you do with that information? What kind of program is contained in that information? You see, so often we get these sort of labeled approaches to our children. Well, they made this score, that score, or they have a reading level of this point or that percentage point or other percentage point, but there's no information there, you see, that you can work with to transform the situation. That says, hey, if you work on this, if you train the child in this area, if you give the child more practice at this point, then this particular behavior will be rectified or enhanced or stimulated for growth. The information processing approach, then I think is a better approach for dealing with problems of this type. And this is in contrast to what we call the psychometric approach, where a child is given a test and essentially then a score is what the parent or another interested person gets. You see, we are deceived in psychology to a great extent by labels. We often think that we have information that we really don't have. To say a child is a slow learner or learning disabled, in a sense, really says nothing. You know, there's really no value in that. It gives you a sense that you know what you're talking about. But in the end, when you really think about setting up a program, you have no program. You see, and the same black children have reading problems, or black children have problems in math. This really says nothing at all. What can you get out of that? There's no information there. It only ends up making people feel bad and inferior and so forth, to making them feel even more frustrated and powerless in terms of how to get out of that situation. So the information processing approach emphasizes how we do what we do. How do you arrive at a particular solution? How do you arrive at a particular problem and solve that problem? The information processing theories then refer to the way people receive information. How is information taken in? And you will see here we're going to talk about input, because that is the very first segment of learning, the taking in of information. Sunday we will show you why many of our children have problems learning, because the intake process is often impaired. The intentional process is impaired in many instances, you see. The focusing of attention is impaired. A child that does not attend well, does not focus well and listens well, more than likely is a child who's going to have learning problems, not because of any inadequacy of the brain or capacity even to think well. The problem is the information didn't get into the system to be thought about, you see. And so, or it may be, there's nothing wrong with the child's capacity to think and to compare and contrast and do all the other things, but the search for information is unsystematic. You see, the ability to code and categorize the information is not there. So consequently, even if the information gets into the system, it cannot be processed appropriately. So then these theories look at how the way people receive information from the environment and the way they operate on it. It is not enough to take information into your minds, but that information must be operated on appropriately. in the mind that can perform those processing activities. Again, you're going to say to many that children have the best brains in the world. But there's a problem often with many of them in terms of how they can program information that is being made available to them. And information theories then get into the rules and the strategies and techniques that are used by the so-called intelligent people and problem-solving people to process information and use information to their advantage. And it's this kind of knowledge we have to begin to solve as a people. And they not only then look at how information is operated on, but how you integrate that information with information available in memory. I was reading recently a book about Shaka Zulu, E.A. Ritter's book, Shaka Zulu, and I recommend that you read that book. You should get all your youngsters to read that book, particularly the males. It's so informative. I'm not saying he's the final authority on Shaka. In fact, you should read that book along with others. But this one I find interesting because you see so much in the book. I'm going to talk a little later on about what I call the personalistic approach to history. We as African people now that we have assuaged our egos and, have sort of gotten over the initial shock of the inferiority complex, it is time now for us to look more critically at ourselves and to move beyond the hero-worshiping approach to history and look at it analytically for the lessons that it teaches us. You see, and look at our heroes critically and analytically so that we can gain important information and lessons for solving our problems. Merely talking about the greatness of Shaka certainly can make us feel good about ourselves, and we should feel good about ourselves. But as I've said on many other occasions, you're going to die feeling good. Yeah, many crack people out there dying feeling good. It's not enough to feel good about yourself to survive. Feeling good about your African self is not going to save your lives. Okay? Knowing that you were great kings in Egypt and great kings in the other parts of Africa is wonderful and it's necessary. But it will not solve particular problems. You have to now look at your heroes in terms of their culture, in terms of the mistakes they made, in terms of the other kind of issues that involve their lives, so that you can get the kind of information you need to survive as a people. And believe me, people, our survival is a serious question today. Very serious question. If you are going to talk about statehood, you're going to have to study statehood, the statecraft of the Egyptians. If you're going to talk about developing an African economy, you're going to have to look at the economic situation of Egypt. You have to recognize that every great civilization, African or otherwise, is based on a great economy. You cannot talk about bringing black people to greatness unless you're talking about erecting a great African economy. It's just not going to happen. So you must ask the question, how did the Egyptians support economically what they had? Because they could not be what they were unless they had an appropriate economy, unless they were appropriately economically organized. They weren't what they were simply because they worshipped, Ra and worshipped the others. Not by a long shot. That was a part of what they were, but it was not a complete part of who and what they were. They were also what they were because of their economic system and approaches, and those things must be understood. We must understand that history has 1,000 faces, that it is designed to answer 1,000 questions, and that looking for heroes is only one function of history. Only one. The history of our people then can be used to provide why didn't I mention shock in this situation? Because when I was reading through it a couple of weeks ago, I was reading this situation of where the Zulu, some of whom they have had as many as 5,000 head of cattle, could remember individually each of those heads of cattle and could tell which one was missing out of the whole lot. You see, and I bring that up, to show again that the African brain is by no means suffering from any memory deficits at all. The memory of Africans was phenomenal. We often think in this day and age of note-taking and so forth that memory is a weak thing. But you must realize and take yourself back to a time when that was all people had to depend on. And recognize then that their memory capacities were developed to a very high degree of perfection. A degree of perfection that we today would be awed by. Memory is literally infinite. You can remember many, many, many things. Just a numberless number of things. And they were able to do that because their lives depended upon it.